In this video, I review the Crust Bombora, a bike that dares to ask the question, where have all the mermaids gone? Well, that question may still go unanswered, but I will tell you what I like and dislike about the Crust Bombora in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're into the non-competitive side of cycling, gravel exploring, bike touring, the supple life, you have found your people. And hey, quick note, if you guys enjoy these reviews that are completely unpaid and you want to see more of them and keep them coming, you can support the channel by buying a patch, a sticker pack, a t-shirt, or joining us on Patreon, where not only do you get the warm and fuzzies of keeping this content going, but you also get some sweet discounts off of brands we love. All right, so if you're not familiar with the brand Crust Bikes, you should check out our interview with Matt, the owner and founder of Crust, and you can get a sense of why he started the brand and his ethos around bike design. So the Bombora, what is it? Is it a rando bike? Is it a bike packing bike? Is it a gravel bike? The answer would be yes. It can definitely be used for all those things, but it's also got a little spiciness to it. Currently, as it stands, you can only purchase the frame set, which goes for about $925. Although if you want a complete bike, Matt will work with you to build a bike from as low as $2,000 all the way up to sky's the limit. This bike in particular is actually Matt's bike, and it's got so much cool bike nerdiness to it. Kind of hard to talk about this bike without talking about the handlebars. It's rocking the Crust Shaka bars, which are 56 centimeters wide. That's right, I did not stutter, I did not mean 46, it is 56. Actually 53 near the hoods and 56 at the drop. And before you freak out, yes, it is much wider than normal. And I thought that too, but after riding it, it actually kind of makes sense under certain conditions, but I'll get into that more when I give you my ride impression. The stem is kind of this one-piece Crust stem. The controls are SRAM Force. Drivetrain is a SRAM Force all around, and it's set up as a 1x. The wheels are an interesting mix of NV carbon hoops laced to DT Swiss hubs, so definitely an upscale build. The brakes are disc brakes, but they are these cool hybrid cable / hydraulic disc brakes by, I believe it's pronounced Yokozuna, and it's the Ultimo model. Let me just say, my first time using them are awesome. They really do give that modulation, that one finger braking of a hydraulic disc brake, but with all the convenience of a cable brake. So if you gotta change the housing length, or you kink a cable, you don't have to deal with fluid exploding all over the place. All that stuff is contained within the brake piston. Definitely the best of both worlds. You can use your pre-existing brake levers, but still benefit from that hydraulic brake feel. And honestly, guys, it feels and acts just like a hydraulic disc brake. So super stoked on these. I may have to get a pair of these brakes for a future bike build. So a little bit more in the front, the fork has got this lug biplane design, and it's got a fair amount of mounting options, enough to run a rando rack or a pec deck that you saw with the Fabio's chest review, or lowriders. It also has eyelets near the dropouts for a fender and a rack. The bike is all through axle, so pretty modern standards. And moving on to the rear, you will notice near the bottom bracket, there is kind of this unique yoke, which allows for lots of tire clearance, but also clearance for road style crank. It's set up 1x currently. I did ask Matt if you could put a wide range double. He said it should fit, but the largest chain ring, quote unquote largest, should probably be no bigger than a 44. On the rear of the bike, it's got mounts for fenders and a rear rack and all that goodness. So overall, a fairly useful and utilitarian bike. You might have also noticed these interesting tires. These are the Ultra Dynamico tires. The stated width is 650B by 47.99. On our caliper, they measure in about 47.5 millimeters. These tires have kind of a triangular knobby design with Ultra Romance's own special race compound, as he likes to call it. And lastly, at the seat, it does have a Ritchie carbon seat post and a Brooks carbon rail saddle. So you might have noticed this theme. There is a fair amount of carbon on this bike, which makes for a really fun, interesting, light, and slightly expensive build. This bike, as you see it, with the 3 bottle cages, weighed in on our scale at about 22 pounds. So pretty light for a steel bike. So that's enough of the specs and bike nerdery. How does the bike ride? So I rode the bike both with the Fabio's chest and the pec deck, and also with no front rack at all. And generally, in my opinion, the steering is fairly chill. really comfortable. It actually works well with a high front load, especially with these bars. I know there's a subset of cyclists that really prefer low trail front end geometry when you're doing a front load. But I found over the course of testing mini bikes, for off-road touring, I actually prefer a little bit higher trail. I feel like the front bike wheel deflects less, holds its line, so if you're going on a rocky descent and if you've got something like a pec deck or a rando bag, you won't get thrown off course very easily. So the Bombora in the front is a very confident descender, really eats up that rocky, chunky stuff fairly well. I felt like the fork deflected a fair amount, and also the stem aided to kind of this softer front end feel. Not to mention it's got a non-tapered head tube, which I think also adds to that less bulkiness, less stiff front end. In terms of the rear, it's got a semi-tucked rear end. The rear chainstay length is 425, so slightly shorter than the typical all-rounder 430, but not so short that it has a road bike rear end. So together, it's a really fun balance. The shorter rear end makes the bike feel zippy, feels quicker to accelerate. I really enjoyed climbing with this bike. It just felt like the bike would absorb your energy and release it at just the right time, both standing and sitting. I think this is partly because of the geometry, but also because of the tubing. The bike is spec'd with 858 tubing, so that's a reference to the tube diameter. So in the spectrum of bike tubes, it's on the thinner side, not paper thin like the Lion Norther that we saw, but probably definitely thinner than what you would see from a Surly. So all this combined made for a really springy and fun ride. As of now, this part of the year, if I were to award the most supple bike of the year award, the most coveted bike award in the entire bike industry, it would definitely have to go to the CRUST BOMBORA. It's just fun and playful and super versatile with all the mounting points, but it doesn't ride like a full-on touring bike. You can definitely use this as a road bike, as a gravel grinder bike. You should check out our interview with Anton Krupicka. He gives his impressions of using this bike for DK. So I know what you're gonna ask is, how does this ride compare to other bikes? So comparing this to something like the Surly Midnight Special, it doesn't have quite as jumpy as a rear end, but it definitely has a more relaxed front end compared to the Midnight Special. So I feel like better suited to long gravel rides and to also really rocky descents. Compared to the Salsa Warbird, I feel like it has a similar front end, but a shorter rear end, so a little bit snappier in the rear, and also the steel just absorbs everything a little bit better than the carbon, so it feels really smooth and buttery and springy. Compared to something like the Crosscheck, again, I think the front end here is a little bit more chill, less twitchy. Don't feel as high on the bike, a little bit more set in. I mean, I think if I were to describe the bike, I would call it a mullet bike. So really kind of chill in the front, but a little bit spicy in the rear. Spicy enough to keep it interesting, not full on tucked, but tucked enough where it works together with the front end for a nice balanced, comfortable, fun, and enjoyable ride. What are the things I like and dislike? First big like is I love the geometry of this bike. It's as if, Matt went into my head and took what I wanted a bike to feel like and made it a reality. I've always wanted something where it's a little bit more tucked in the rear, but chill in the front, and this bike is a good representation of that. I also like that it uses a little bit lighter tubing. That's one of the big gripes with Surly. They've got lots of interesting bikes, but the tubing tends to be a little bit on the thicker and heavier side. But this feels noticeably lighter and also just a little bit springier. Another big like is the utility. It does have all the mounts if you want to run a rear rack or load stuff in the front. It doesn't have a 3-pack mount, although you can kind of get around that a little bit if you use the Problem Solver's anchor ties. These two eyelets are spaced pretty well, so it should be able to hold a dry bag fairly well if you use that system. So another big like for me is the aesthetics. It's not for everyone, but I do love this kind of Pepto lavender color. Again, not for everyone, but for me, I dig it. So what are the cons? Potential con for some folks would be the price. It is a little bit on the pricier end for a steel frame set, but I think completely within reason. $925. You get a fun and playful frame that you can build up a ton of ways as a racer, as a commuter, as a tourer. I think another con is that it only comes as a frame set, so you do have to build it yourself or work with Matt directly to have it built up and shipped to you. I think if this could be sold as a complete, it would just be flying out the door. A lot more people would be able to experience what a Crust bike is like without going through the hassle of building it up themselves. And that's about it. There's actually There's actually very little I dislike about this bike. I mean, it's just a fun bike. So I'm gonna talk really quickly about these handlebars though, because I thought they were a really interesting experience. Yes, you're on the wider side. It gives you a lot of leverage when you're climbing. You can really honk it left and right on steep stuff. It also gives you the clearances to run something like the Fabio's chest or a basket, but it does take some getting used to. If you're of the type where you measure your shoulders and like you're locked into that's the only handlebar I should ever ride, you kind of have to let go of that. And here's my thought on it. 56 centimeters, yes, definitely wide for a road bar, but if this were a mountain bike, those would be pretty narrow mountain bike bars. I've always questioned why, why do we have such strict standards in terms of width with road cycling, but when people ride mountain bikes, sky's the limit. I think a bar this wide offers some advantages, especially when you're descending really technical stuff. You get all the benefits of the leverage and the stability of a wider bar. It's also wide enough that you could run interrupter brake levers, especially with this setup. Pretty easy to do because it is cables. You can have a flat bar with brakes if you're doing a technical downhill descent, but still also have the comfort of road bars on more kind of even terrain. So another question you guys are gonna have is how did the tires ride? Again, these are the Ultra Dynamico tires. I think on the road, they're a little bit on the buzzy side. You definitely hear them. The knobs are pretty pronounced. So probably not my favorite tire for extended pavement riding. So if you're doing a ride where it's like 80% pavement and 20% gravel or trail, probably not the tire for you. But once you're on the gravel road or doing some single track, these tires did really well. In terms of suppleness, there was a lot of give in the casing, so you could really fine tune it for the terrain you're riding on. In terms of grip, definitely grippier than WTB Horizons, probably slightly less grippy than the WTB Sendero in my experience. Fair amount of traction in loamy stuff or even slightly muddy terrain. If you're riding on something super dry and dusty and rocky, these might not have quite enough bite for that. But I think for about 90% of the off-road gravel riding that a lot of people will experience, this is a great tire and definitely on the supple side. So that's the Bombora. Really interesting bike, really fun bike. Gonna be sad to send it back to Matt. If you guys have any other questions, leave those in the comments below. And again, if you guys dig these reviews, I don't think anyone has reviewed a Crust bike yet. Support the channel, keep all this good content coming, and as always, keep the supple side down.